recording. And we are recording now. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about how we're going to assess a hazmat incident. We're going to look at it, we're going to view it, we're going to figure out the terminology and the possible situations we can experience. And then we're going to analyze that situation and evaluate what we can do about it. So very much like firefighting or anything else in life, we have some incident priorities. These are the basic goals that we want to achieve. And everything we do is in support of achieving these goals. So our incident priorities are always in this order. Number one is life safety. That's safety of our life, victims' lives, and the public. Incident stabilization. What does that mean? We don't want the incident to get worse, right? It's not growing outside our control. And then finally, property and environmental protection or preservation. Part of our job is to protect property and the environment. So that will be the third priority. There are some incident categories that describe the severity of an incident. So level 1 is the lowest. I wish everybody would get on board with what numbers mean what. Is 1 high or 1 low? In this case, level 1 is low. So what's a level 1 incident? It's within the capabilities of the fire or emergency services organization or other first responders having jurisdiction. It's the least serious and the easiest to handle. There may be a serious life threat or property threat, but not often. Maybe limited evacuation. So for an example, you got a small amount of gasoline or diesel fuel spilled from an automobile or a truck. Remember, a small amount is less than 52.83 gallons. So anything less than a 55-gallon drum, less than a small saddle tank on a truck. And so this is something that your response organization, your fire department should be able to manage without requesting any further resources. That's a level 1. Level 2, it's beyond the capabilities of your organization. Requires the service of a formal hazmat response team. So example, a spill or leak requiring large-scale evacuation, any major accident, spillage, or overflow of flammable liquids. So if a 406 turns over on the Homer Adams extension and it's just filled up and it's leaking its tens of thousands of gallons of diesel fuel into Wood River Creek, then you call the hazmat team. Oh, wait, that was a year ago. That's what I was doing. So that would be a level 2. Calling a hazmat team, calling in mutual aid resources, things like that. That's a level 2. Level 3. This is going to require resources from state or provincial agencies, some federal agencies, or even private industry. Usually requires unified command. We talked about that, how we're going to have multiple agencies with their hands in responsibility of this. So we need to get together and unify that command. It's the most serious of all incidents, may require large-scale evacuation, could extend across jurisdictional boundaries. So if we had an incident on the river and we needed to evacuate both sides of the river, multiple counties, multiple municipalities, things like that, level 3. That's the big one. So a hazmat incident is a problem. We need to solve it. That's why we get called in. So there's a process for solving that problem. These steps are in order. And so we're going to need to know that this is in red. So you're going to need to know the order of the problem solving process. Number 1, we're going to analyze the incident. We need to understand the problem, what's going on. Information, information, information. Number 2, then we're going to plan the response. We're going to set our strategic goals. So once we get our information, we're going to say, all right, we're going to identify what the product is, what its hazards are, what its PPE's requirements are, how we're going to control its movement, and then we're going to plan that response. So, for example, if we have a spill, like for example, that 406 that overturned last year and leaked into Woodriver Creek, we decided that our strategic goal was to, one, limit the amount of diesel getting into the creek and pick a point on the creek that we're not going to let diesel pass. That was our strategic goal. That goes along with stabilizing the incident stabilization. And then implement the plan. These are our tactics and tasks. Tactics we put out boom and pads right where the diesel was getting into the creek. We created dikes to retain it in an area. And then we put river boom and oil absorbent boom across the river or the creek to absorb it downstream. And then the other task was call in a remediation company with a vac truck to suck the diesel up. So those were the tactics and tasks that allowed us to meet our strategic goals, which allowed us to meet our incident priorities. And number 4, we're going to evaluate our progress. We're going to look back. We're going to take a step back. We're going to look at how our actions are affecting the incident, and is it getting better? This is a key step in the process. I presented a class at Edwardsville about firefighters who are responding to Class B liquid fuel fires, like on a highway. And you watch the video, and it's very easy while you're watching the video to see how they're not doing this 4th step, not evaluating their progress. They'll do something, they'll perform a task, and they'll get better for a moment, and then they'll get worse. They'll do that same thing again, and the same thing happens. It gets worse. It doesn't get better. Nothing improves. That's because they're not evaluating their progress and changing their tactics to meet the needs of the incident. It's very frustrating. So we have to do this in order to know if we need to go back to step 1 and analyze the incident again. Make sure we understand the problem. So some other things we're going to talk about the analyzing: wind direction, topography, presence of victims, and how much personnel do you have available? Do we need more people? We're going to identify those clues that indicate the presence of a hazardous material. Remember, there's 6 recognition clues, and we're going to use those to determine that. Going to use the ERG, and we talked about that. So here's some common elements that are involved in a hazardous material incident. There's something that is presenting hazards to people, the environment, or property. There's something something has gotten out, and now it is a hazard. No, I'm sorry. There's something in the environment. It could still be in its container. Also, number 2, the container has failed or the potential to fail. And number 3, there's been exposure or potential exposure to people, the environment, or property. So every hazmat incident, there's a hazardous material involved. The container has failed or is about to fail, or someone has been exposed or is about to be exposed. That's in all hazmat incidents. Remember, with an incident, there are 6 sides. There's a top, bottom, left, right, front, and back. And we have to think about all those sides. We don't want anything hiding beyond our knowledge and surprise us later. Hazardous materials can be very surprising. We don't want that. So this is the behavior model of a hazardous material release. So the first thing is there is a stress on the container. It can be a thermal stress. We'll talk about that later. There's all kinds of different ones. So this is the order. It always goes in this order. There's a stress on the container, then there's a breach in the container, then there's a release of the materials, and then it's dispersed or engulfed the environment or people. There's exposure or contact with the materials, and then whatever is exposed experiences harm. It's always in that order. So what are the types of stress that can occur on a container? There's thermal, chemical, and mechanical. Thermal, excessive heat or cold, causing expansion, contraction, weakening, or consumption of the container or its parts, and the container cannot tolerate this change in its physical state. When I say physical state, it's condition, not solid, liquid, or gas. So heat or cold, that's thermal stress. Chemical stress, it's uncontrolled reactions or interactions of contents in the container and the container itself. We talked about polymerization and reactivity. That's what we're talking about here. If there is an acid that is encountering a container, it could denigrate the status of the container, and it releases its contents. And there's also mechanical. This is physical application of energy. Something hits it and damages the container or an attachment on that container. Often, so a crash, somebody drops something, something hits something. Those are all mechanical. What else? Oh, if there's an explosion and the container is not involved in the original explosion, and some type of shrapnel or a shock wave hits that container, that is mechanical. After the stress, there's a breach. The container opens. There's different types of breaching: disintegration, runaway cracking, attachments to the container open up. There's a puncture, a split or a tear, or metal reduction. Those are the ways that a container can be breached. So what is disintegration? This is when the container suffers a general loss of integrity, such as a glass bottle shattering or a grenade exploding. So the container is one solid piece, and then it's multiple little pieces, and no longer a container. Runaway cracking. So this is a crack that develops in the container, which continues to grow rapidly. So this is not going to be at a seam. This is going to be in the main surface of the container. A crack starts, and then it just keeps going. Some containers have attachments. These can open or break. There's discharge valves. They can fail. They can open or break off when subjected to stress. Pipes get knocked off, things like that. You can have a puncture, mechanical stress, comes in contact with the container, just a single point. It doesn't travel. It's just whatever size the impact created. A split or tear is a failure of a welded seam on a tank or drum, or a ripped seam on a bag of fertilizer. So runaway cracking is not a seam. Split or tear is a seam. Metal reduction. So this is when you get corrosive materials on steel or some other metal, and it actually, or even rust would be metal reduction. Some type of oxidation in that form or corrosive action. So once you've had the stress, you've had a breach, then the stuff's coming out, and we have different types of release. We have detonation, a violent rupture, a rapid relief, or a spill or leak. These are not in particular order, not really numbered in a way, but there's 4 of them. But just in general, they went from the most energetic to the least energetic. So in detonation, instantaneous and explosive release of stored chemical energy, big boom. A violent rupture, immediate release of a chemical or mechanical energy caused by runaway cracks. So this doesn't usually involve a fire. It's just if like just so much pressure is inside, it just opens up really quickly. Rapid relief. It's a fast relief of a pressurized hazardous material through properly operating safety devices or damaged valves or attachments or holes in the container. So you got a hole in the container either through a puncture or a existing attachment, a valve or a pressure relief valve, and that has opened up, and it's just releasing from that opening, and it's not, the opening's not getting any bigger, which is what happened with a violent rupture, because there's a crack, runaway crack. So this would be like you like a propane tank, and you knock the valve off of it, it opens up. Then you got a spiller leak. This is a slow release, not very energetic, relatively, of the hazardous material under atmospheric or head pressure. Head pressure is the pressure of the weight of the material through holes, rips, tears, or usual openings or attachments. So this could be usually a solid, reference a spill or a leak, usually reference to a solid or a liquid. All right, so we've had stress, we've had a breach, we've had a release, and now what's it going to do? It's going to disperse. And they have different dispersion patterns that different materials exhibit. There's hemispheric, cloud, plume, stream, pool, irregular, or a pile. Let's talk about those. So hemispheric, it's semicircular or dome-shaped pattern of an airborne hazardous material that is still partially in contact with the ground or water. So you got something that's heavier than air or relatively close to the vapor density of air, and it's going to sit low on the ground. It's not going to rise and disperse. It's going to sit and form a semicircular or dome-shaped pattern. It's only semicircular because the ground's in the way. So that is hemispheric. Looks like a hemisphere. And then there's a cloud. This is a gaseous material that's going to have a vapor density higher than, less than 1. So it's going to rise, can be ball-shaped, where the material is collectively risen above the ground or water. So it's not sitting on the ground. You can have a plume. So a plume is irregularly shaped. Again, it's airborne. And the wind or the topography influence the downrange course from the point of release. So a plume means that wind is moving it in a specific direction. And then also consider that the topography could also influence its course. A stream is a surface following pattern of liquid affected by gravity and topographical contours. I hope that's pretty obvious. So it's going to follow the surface and gravity. A stream. You have a pool, it's 3-dimensional. Remember that? There's length, width, and depth. It's slow flowing liquid dispersion. So it's not moving in a linear fashion. It's moving in a semicircular fashion away from the point of release, and it's going to keep growing unless we do something about it, or it runs out of product. So that's a pool. Then we have an irregular dispersion pattern. So this is indiscriminate deposit of the hazardous material. This example, something has walked through the spill and has become contaminated and is now spreading it. So it's irregular. It's not all contained. This could be an animal, could be a person. Let's see, I guess a plant, or the wind could make it skip or something. I don't know. Irregular. And then you have a pile. So it's three-dimensional, can be semi-flowing, but it's a solid, a pile. All right, so that's how hazardous materials get out of its container and what it does once it's out. Remember, its chemical and physical properties will determine what it does once it's outside its container. So the next thing we need to do is determine the incident size. How are we going to do that? We're going to use our resources. If we know that a hazardous material exists in our community, we're going to do a pre-incident survey or a pre-plan. And we're going to figure out what that chemical is, what the containers are, what its physical and chemical properties are, what its hazards are. And we're going to find out what the prevailing winds are. And we're going to figure out if there's any potential target hazards. So is there a school, a hospital, elder care home? Is there a waterway? Is there drains in the area? We're going to do all that so that if something does, if there is a release, we'll have half our plan done already. You can also use computer software. The government puts out multiple types of software you can use. There's Cameo, Marplot, and Aloha. Cameo is a chemical information database. Aloha and Marplot are used to graph plumes. So you put in all kinds of detailed information, including the weather. You can either, and then also mapping data, and it will tell you where that plume is going. That way you can determine what your evacuation or shelter in place areas are. You can use the ERG. It'll help you with that. And then also monitoring. We'll get into monitoring next week, but monitoring will tell you where the material is. That way you know how big your incident is. And then the next part in the algorithm is exposure. So what can be exposed? People, the environment, and property. There are time frames of exposure. There's immediate, which is milliseconds or seconds. There's short term, which is minutes or hours. There's medium term, which is days, weeks, and months, or long term, years and generations. So this is how long someone is exposed, or a environment or property is exposed over time. And then harm occurs. So what's the possibility of harm? There's loss of life and injury, property loss and damage, environmental damage, and financial losses as well. In general, we talked about specific harms previously. So we talked about our incident priorities: life safety, incident stabilization, environmental and property protection or preservation. What are our tactical goals? How are we going to achieve those priorities with these right here? Isolation. We're going to keep people out of harm. Pretty simple. Sounds simple. It's much harder. People have a hard time being told what to do, and people have a hard time realizing they're doing something they shouldn't be. And so sometimes it can be hard to do that. Identification, figuring out what the materials are. Notification, request additional resources. So if it's beyond that level 1 incident, or if you're not sure, call for additional help. You can also contact the EPA and contact Chemtrec, and they will help you out with that. Protection, physical separation from the material, wearing the proper PPE. Spill control, we're going to keep the material in an area. We may have to give up some area to do that safely. That's part of that strategic decision making. And then, but they're going to control it. We're going to make it go where we want it to go. Then there's leak control. We can stop the material from leaving the container. That's a technician level. Then fire control, keep the fire from growing. Sometimes it's not best to put it out until we can do some other things. And then recovery / termination, the hazard no longer exists or the emergency no longer exists. Now it's just an incident that needs to get cleaned up. So what do we do before taking action, before we decide which of those tasks we're going to perform? We need to determine the risk to the rescuers. Is what we're going to do, is it going to have enough value to risk our lives? And do we have the equipment, the training, and the PPE, and enough people to perform those tasks? The ability of the rescuers to protect themselves, like I said, with the PPE, the probability of a rescue, the difficulty of a rescue. So those two kind of go hand in hand. If something is going to be too difficult and a victim is going to die before we can get to them, and the probability of rescue significantly goes down, there's no need to risk our lives unnecessarily to save somebody who's already died. Our capabilities and resources that are on scene, possibilities of explosions or sudden material releases. This is that bluffy we're talking about. If fire has been lapping the sides of a propane tank for the last 15 to 20 minutes, there is a high probability and possibility of an explosion. There is not much we can do in the time we have because we really don't know when that's going to happen. If the PRV is opened up and it's blowing, chances are we're not going to be able to get things in place to change the outcome. That's the whole idea here, is it's going to explode no matter what we do. So the point is, don't be next to it. Available escape routes and safe havens, and the constraints of time and distance. Sometimes hazardous material incidents are very large, and where the hot zone is maybe a long distance from where your command post or your dress out area is. Again, if we have time is not on our side, then we might want to make other plans. A way to remember all the things you need before taking action is tapes plus time. So what's tapes stand for? Training. Do you have the training to perform the tasks which need to be accomplished? Do you have the apparatus present? Is there enough personnel? Do you have the right equipment? And can you do it safely? If you can answer yes to all of those, then the plan is safe to implement. And then remember, this stuff takes time. Hazmat is usually pretty slow. People joke about hurry up and wait. Hazmat is almost always hurry up and wait, because we need to get that information, because we need to get that information to perform that assessment before we take action. Otherwise, we can get ourselves in pretty big trouble. Some other questions we need to consider: how long will the harmful exposure exist? So say we have a chemical gas released and it's heading toward a neighborhood. If the wind's blowing, say 20 miles an hour, and all the gas has been released, it's not going to stay in that neighborhood very long. We would not have time to evacuate people and put them in safe shelter. So that exposure is very short. So we would try to tell them to shelter in place, but otherwise we don't want them coming outside, because that's where the hazard is. So how long will that harmful exposure exist? If it's going to be really quick, then we probably don't want to have people evacuate. We'll have them shelter in place. If it's a long, slow leak and the wind's very calm and it's not moving very fast, we might have time to evacuate those people. We also want to know what has stressed or is stressing the container. So remember thermal, chemical, and mechanical stresses. So is there fire impinging on the container? Had there been a mechanical impact to that container? Is there a mechanical stress now, mechanical energy now? Also think about, for long-term hazardous material incidents, the weather. We can have pretty significant temperature fluctuations. Just a few days ago, it was below freezing. The high was below freezing. Today was in the 50s. Tomorrow, the high is going to be in the 40s. Friday, it's going to be back in the 50s. We have these huge temperature swings that could significantly affect the container or the material inside. So those are all stresses that we need to consider. If the container is not opened already, hasn't been breached, how will the stressed container and its material behave? So what is the type of breach that we can expect, and what's the dispersion pattern we can expect? And then what are the harmful effects of the contained materials? Some other safety considerations: we need to make sure we're using the accountability system, some type of accountability. We don't want people wandering off and getting lost and forgotten about. We're going to use the buddy system. Everybody needs to at least work in groups, at least a group of 2. No one works alone. Even on a minor incident, let's see, just into last week, we got activated, the hazmat team got activated for so our mission is emergency response, but this call was not for emergency response. It was kind of just it was a air quality monitoring. And could I have done it by myself? Absolutely. I'm just going in with one monitor and to this house and checking for volatile organic compounds. Could I have done that by myself? Absolutely. But that's not how we operate. So I reached out to the rest of the team and found somebody that was available, could meet me on scene. And now there's 2 of us there. Backup personnel. So we didn't have backup personnel, but for the situation, didn't really dictate it. But we also, so it was in firefighting, you hear about the 2 in, 2 out. Same thing with hazmat, but you're probably going to need more than 2 people to back up, because hazmat can be a little more complicated. But we need all those things. So all those things, those are highlighted or bold. So we'll need to know those are our safety considerations for any hazmat incident: accountability, use the buddy system, have backup personnel. You can have a informal incident action plan and a formal incident action plan. So for example, with say a house structure fire, an informal action plan, our engine is going to stretch a hand line to the alpha side for fire suppression and search. That is your incident action plan. We're operating in the offensive mode. That is your incident action plan. Stretch a hand line to the alpha side for fire suppression and search. Task, location, objective, and your operational mode, offensive. That's an informal incident action plan. With hazmat, we need to develop eventually a formal incident action plan. And this is usually for the bigger incidents. So usually for a diesel spill, which is our most common request for the hazmat team, we're not going to do a formal incident action plan, but something that's going to be multiple hours, multiple days, we're going to do a formal one. You're going to have incident objectives. You're going to have a current situation summary, resource assignment and needs, accomplishments, what we've gotten done, hazard statement, a risk assessment, a safety plan, protective measures, current projected weather conditions, status of injuries, a communications plan, and a medical plan. So like I said, most of the time we have an informal one of these, but for larger incidents, we'll create a formal one and we'll use the ICS, FEMA ICS forms to do that. As I alluded to, we have modes of operation. The first one we're going to talk about is defensive. So remember, hazmat operations, we operate in a defensive mode. So what does that mean for hazmat? We're going to provide confinement of the hazard to a given area. So remember, this is a little pet peeve of mine. Containment is keeping the material in its container. Containment, container. Confinement is to an area. A lot of people just say container or containment. Okay. But if you want to be technical, confinement is to the area. How are we going to do that? We're going to perform diking, damming, or diverting actions in general. So defensive operations and we're going to choose this when one of the following circumstances exists. So the incident calls for it based on a pre-incident evaluation of the hazards present, or the responders have the training and equipment necessary to confine the incident to the area of origin. So we talked about those pre-incident plans. If a facility calls for it, we're going to be defensive. And then if it's outside of facility, if we have the training and equipment necessary, then we're going to take care of it. After this class, you will have the training and you will know what equipment you'll need in order to do that. Then there's offensive. Remember, this is beyond the scope of responsibilities and beyond your scope of practice for the awareness and operations level, is offensive. So this includes actions where you go into the hot zone, you're probably getting product on you to control the incident, such as plugging a leak. This is containment, inside, keeping it in the container. This is offensive. This is not what hazmat ops does. Remember, if you operate outside your scope of practice, you could be held liable for your actions. And then one we don't talk about very much is non-intervention, but always, always, always keep it as a possibility. Don't forget about non-intervention. This allows the incident to run its course on its own. So when do you use this? So at a facility during pre-incident planning, and you've decided along with the facility that non-intervention, there's nothing you can do, that's the plan. The situation is clearly beyond the capabilities of the responders. Explosions are imminent, or serious container damage threatens a massive release. The point is, you are either not trained, you do not have the equipment or the personnel to be able to handle the situation safely and effectively, or no matter what you do, you're not going to change the outcome. It's still going to blow up. If you're confident that it's going to blow up, no matter what you do, then non-intervention is your mode of operation. It is extremely difficult emotionally to perform non-intervention, because that's why people called us, to come and do something about it. But what's the point if, so really communication is key here to make sure whoever called us understands that there's nothing, no matter what we do, the outcome is not going to change until later on down the timeline. So non-intervention allows the incident to run its course on its own. So those are the plans we can do. Here's the incident evaluation. We're going to evaluate that plan and see if it's working. So is it working? So there's two options, two ways it can go. Control is being gained, your response objectives are being met. What do you do? Continue with your course of action. If what you expected to happen is happening, then you keep doing what you're doing. The other option that could happen is the incident is intensifying. Your response objectives are not being met. What does that mean? You are trying to cool a high pressure, flammable, compressed liquid tank that's has fire. It's being boiled off, and you do not, for this example, water is just evaporating and not running off the side of the tank. You're putting 500 gallons of water on this tank, and it is so hot that it is just boiling off the water that you're putting on there. You are not being effective. That PRV whistling sound is getting higher in pitch. That means the pressure is increasing. At some point, it's going to get high enough where that container will not hold it. And that means your response objectives are not being met. So what do? You return to the analysis step of the process. We need to gather more information and figure out a new plan. If the incident continues, then seriously consider the option to pull back and change from the defensive mode of operation to the non-intervention mode of operation. If you can't handle the situation, request additional resources. You need to know how your department requests that. So in Madison County, whatever responding fire department, the authority having jurisdiction, they will request the hazmat team through Edwardsville Dispatch, and Edwardsville Dispatch will activate the on-duty duty officer, and then they will contact the incident commander or their designee, get an assessment of the situation, and determine what action the hazmat team needs to take. So that's how it works in Madison County, or that's how it should work. I don't know. We do need, let's just say we need to work on training and educating people in that. But that's how we do it in Madison County. So also we need to talk about using communication equipment. So with using a radio, in general, these are best practices. Your department may have other policies. It's best to use simple English, clear speech, not using codes, transmit only essential information when sending information and orders, not extraneous information. Examples would be so you might hear "be advised" or "at this time." Sometimes those are extra wording. Just heard some yesterday. I was at work yesterday, trying to remember. But I'm sure you've heard it. I don't have any examples right now. I apologize. Use appropriate channels to communicate. So sometimes in larger incidents, we have multiple radio channels for different operations going on. Make sure you're on the right channel. And then they use the appropriate number of channels for the size and complexity of the incident. When we talked about with the formal incident action plan, there's a communications plan. That would be part of that. And then requesting additional help. Know what types of additional help are available. Like I said, Madison County has a hazmat team. We have a rehab unit with emergency management. They can be helpful. We have do not have a tech rescue team. They've been talking about that for years. Right now, we just call specific departments that have the equipment and the trained personnel. Let's see. You can contact the EPA. They'll help out. They'll give you information. They won't like come out and help you dike, dam, or divert, but they'll help you with some technical information. And that is the end of that. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Nobody has any questions. You guys have a great night, and I'll see you back here next Wednesday.
Thank you. You too.
Yep,
Right.
take it easy.